know about non-MAGI budgeting for disabled, aged, and blind New Yorkers. And if you're on the phone and can't hear me, just speak up, please, or if you're not on mute.
Raise your hand. If you cannot hear us, email me, and then I'll know. I've done, anyway, I've done webinars where things have not gone right.
All right, so,
either way. Yeah, okay. There you go.
All right, so for today's agenda, we're going to work on identifying non-MAGI population, an overview of non-MAGI budgeting, so household size, income, and resources, and other tools you can use in order to get people covered, like a spend down, as well as some other coverage options. And if I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know. So first, identifying non-MAGI population. In order to do so, we thought we would first go over what MAGI is. So MAGI stands for Modified Adjusted Gross Income, and it's a method for determining household size and income that's based on tax law. This is to determine eligibility for all IAPs that include Medicaid, Child Health Plus, assuming CHIP gets reauthorized at some point, APTCs, CSRs under the ACA. So MAGI Medicaid is sort of like Obamacare Medicaid. That's one way to think about it. So MAGI and non-MAGI, generally MAGI budgeting is used for non-disabled persons or those under 65, but there are some exceptions. Non-MAGI budgeting is only available at local departments of social services. So in New York City, that's HRA. And all NISO cases, NISO's New York State of Health, have MAGI budgeting. So those that are eligible, who are eligible for MAGI budgeting rules, but whose cases remain at local departments of social services like HRA, use what's called MAGI-like budgeting. And that's when they use MAGI income rules and non-MAGI household composition rules. So if you like rules, this is a good presentation. And if you don't, I'm sorry. So identifying non-MAGI populations. As you can see, there are a number of groups up here. So there are those that are categorically eligible. That means those who are on SSI and therefore have Medicaid automatically, children in foster care. You can read these yourselves, but I'll go through them quickly. Those who are age 65 plus, eligibility based on being blind or disabled, eligible for long-term care services, eligible for MSPs, Medicare savings programs, medically needy, those applicants for MBI WPD, which means Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities, applicants for cancer treatment programs if they're over 138% of the federal poverty level, former foster care youth, and these are folks, recently this was changed to those who were in foster care in New York State, residents of adult homes operated by the Office of Mental Health, and then those who have COBRA. Okay. I'm not sure if those of you on the computer, if it's getting cut off for you, but the title says some can choose MAGI or non-MAGI budgeting. So those who are certified disabled under age 65 but not yet receiving Medicare can choose between MAGI or non-MAGI budgeting. Those parents or caretaker relatives of children under 18 or under 19 if they're in school, even if they're disabled, over 65 and or receiving Medicare can choose. And those disabled children unless they are in a waiver program. Importantly, if you're eligible for either MAGI or non-MAGI budgeting, you get the benefit of whatever is the most favorable budgeting to you. Okay, so now on to the topic du jour, non-MAGI budgeting. I don't know if you can see the slide on the computer, but non-MAGI eligibility budgeting has been unchanged by the ACA. So individuals in a non-MAGI group, they follow pre-ACA budgeting methods. So there have been no changes to income and resource limits. And resource generally means stuff that you have, I like to think of it sitting in the bank or money that you're not getting in every month. There are some rules about that, but just that's how I generally think about it. You use SSI-related budgeting. So an SSI-related means that you use the same budgeting as if you're 65 plus, certified blind and or certified disabled. The elderly and disabled can still use a spend down in order to get Medicaid. The disabled can use supplemental needs trust, which Rebecca will talk about later. MBI, WPD, the buy-in for working persons with disabilities is still an option for some people. And there have been no changes to MSP applications or to the process of MSP applications.
Okay, on to me. Okay, you're gonna throw me this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so SSI-related budgeting. So the income limits. So I'm sure everybody is generally familiar with the eligibility under MAGI, which is at least 138% of the federal poverty limit. There are lower income limits. The basic income limits are lower in SSI-related budgeting and non-MAGI budgeting, but there is more. There's sort of a lot going on in terms of how it works with the household size. There are certain disregards available, and as we'll go through, there are kind of other options and flexibility for people to be covered. Just put the kind of the basic non-MAGI Medicaid levels on here. It's for a household of one, it's just $825 a month. Of course, there are disregards that apply to virtually everybody. And there is a resource test. Really the SSI-related group is the only category who still have a resource test under Medicaid in New York State. Okay, so this is we're cutting off the okay. So this says SSI-related household size married couples. So there's a dirty word on this slide, and it's allocation. I'm not in this, we're not in this training going through allocation and dealing, which is kind of the really complex ways that, things that come up for budgeting of like kind of complicated SSI related households. However, because it really, once you start going through examples of allocation and deeming, it really would be the entire hour. But I wanted to touch on it just from the perspective of, first of all, if it is something that people would be interested in. I know, like, even if we wanted to do it, like, a webinar outside of the
an optional.
Yeah, like right outside the regular meetings or something. I'd be happy to do it because to the extent that people are interested. But it's it is kind of its own topic. But I wanted to bring it up just from the perspective of it comes up actually a little bit more than you think, and it does impact the household size for couples when it's one SSI related and one non-SSI related spouse. So I wanted to kind of throw it in here and just kind of refer to it. But allocation and deeming in figuring out these complicated family budgets does get very, very complicated. But so this chart just kind of goes through the household size for different kinds of married couples where at least one person is SSI related. When both spouses are SSI related, this is actually a very simplistic rule. The household size is just 2. They both people's incomes are counted. The household size is 2. The household size for resources is always 2 for that kind of couple as well. When one spouse is SSI related, this is where the allocation comes in. The actual income of both people in the couple makes a difference in terms of whether you're looking at the SSI related individual individually or with their spouse and looking at them as a household of two. But for those individuals, they're always a household size of two for resources, which can make things kind of complicated. And spouses who are living apart, it's always that they're looked at individually. Okay, so this is just a little bit more of the SSI related adult with the non-SSI related spouse. So what we're not going into here is if there are children in the household, that's where deeming comes into effect. So when you have a family, and this is where it really matters, kind of, you know, these are the situations where you really might be figuring out what is the best budgeting for this. What is the best budgeting for this family in terms of you're looking at each kind of individual in the household. You might have like one SSI related and one non-SSI related parent, one SSI related, one non-SSI related child. So, but when, you know, in terms of just like we're looking at the adults here, there's a process of allocating some income to non-SSI related children, and then you're looking at the remaining income and you're figuring out the income of the SSI related spouse and figuring out their eligibility that way. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, because this actually came up in one of our cases recently where we thought somebody's income, like countable income, was lower than it was, it's because of this order. You do this allocation and the deeming, and then you're subtracting disregards. We were trying in this particular case to do an earned income disregard on more of the money in the household, and that's where we were actually like messing up for a second, because the order of how you're doing it is important. So I mean, the takeaway here is, like, as I said, it was just sort of too much like in this training to get into all of allocation and deeming. But if you have a really complex household with like people with all these different statuses, you know, we or one of the other specialists is, where we can certainly kind of like help you work through the complicated budgeting, because sometimes there are situations where somebody really is eligible, even if you're like, oh, there's like $2,500, $3,500 of income a month in this house, there's no way. But sometimes the budgeting does sort of help, work out for people. Are there questions at this point? I know this is like a lot and I'm not really getting into all of it, but is like the big picture semi-clear? Oh, here.
Just give me a second to see if there's any questions. No questions.
Okay. All righty. Okay. All right. Okay, so just a couple other notes about household size when there are SSI-related people in the household. SSI-related kids are always budgeted as a household of one, using income that's coming into them. Like, for example, if they're getting Social Security disability benefits off of like a parent's history, work history, and any income that again might be deemed from the parents as part of this very complicated allocation and deeming process. And people who are actually getting SSI or public assistance are not counted in the household size. They're like totally out of it. Their income is out and they are out, and you're looking at the rest of the family individually. Just to clarify, the difference between SSI and SSI related, somebody who's SSI is somebody who's actually getting supplemental security insurance income. They're a person who's automatically getting Medicaid through getting SSI, and they are different from SSI related. SSI related means over 65, disabled or blind, but not actually getting SSI. It really is just like a name for aged or disabled or blind, and it's a little bit of a confusing name, but it means they're not on SSI. They're just in one of those other categories. Okay. Okay. So income. I think most people probably have a general understanding of what is income. It's generally money that you're receiving, usually regularly. It's counted in the month received. If once you receive it in a month, if it's still sitting in your bank account, it's resources in the next month. There's earned income, and there is unearned income. For people who are not getting, whose income is irregular, there really aren't great rules on the, in terms of the, the non-MAGI budgeting in the local district. It's really, you're supposed to kind of do the best job you can of averaging it out over, quarters or years. This is something that the marketplace and, sort of MAGI budgeting generally has done a much better job with dealing with people who have more sporadic income. But then again, a lot of people who are in the non-MAGI category are getting are on a fixed income, and so they're getting Social Security or something else, and it is more regular. And then there's in-kind income, which can be earned or unearned. That's things that you're receiving in goods or services. So that comes up as well. Okay. When were you thinking?
I was thinking I will do spend down.
Okay.
But if you want to.
No, I just don't want to make sure. Okie dokie. Okay, so disregards. This is again where there's really the distinction, excuse me, between the MAGI budgeting and the non-MAGI budgeting, because MAGI really does not have many disregards to speak of. So earned income is a big one, and this comes up a lot in households where maybe one person is disabled and one person is working, because from the perspective of the disabled person, you are going to be able to deduct the first $65 and then half of the remainder of earned income. This is a really big one that ends up, for a family where where someone's working, it makes a big difference in determining Medicaid eligibility. The first $20 of unearned income, any health insurance premiums that people are paying, either Medicare premiums or private insurance premiums, and there's a whole long list of disregards. Some of them are, kind of really obscure, but I would say if you ever are, are dealing with, somebody who has, some, kind of, payment from something that you've never really heard of before, look it up in the Medicaid reference guide. Maybe it's something that is like in one of those obscure disregards. And then, again, we're referring to supplemental needs trust, which we'll talk about more. Okay. So available resources, basically anything that you could turn into cash is an available resource. So, basically any cash you have in the bank, stocks, bonds, life insurance that has a cash value. If there are things like IRAs that you would have, that you would be penalized by a certain amount of money for taking it out, it's like the amount you could get out. It's not necessarily, it would subtract the amounts of penalties, because it's like basically if you liquidated your assets, what you would actually have. And as we'll talk about later, there is a higher limit for the Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities. There are some resource disregards. And this is different for nursing homes. And this is for community-based care. The home that you are living in does not count unless the equity is more than $840,000. Prepaid funeral arrangements and burial funds also are resource disregard. Something that's an irrevocable annuity that is in payout status you have to be careful with, though, because it's not going to be considered a resource. But if it's in payout status, the income that the money that you're getting paid out every month, that is income. And then if you have people with with additional property, like maybe a rental property that they're making money on and things like that, maybe property that has to do with a business, these are going to be the complicated cases that we're always happy to, kind of help sort out in terms of how it's impacting somebody's eligibility, because there are, the complicated cases, can be difficult to sort, but then a lot of times there are people who are, eligible who may not realize it because they have income producing property, but it's like not really producing much income. Okay. So this is important, spousal impoverishment budgeting. So this is something that used to be only available to people who were in nursing homes. And the reason that spousal impoverishment budgeting exists is for the reason that when an individual is in a nursing home and is there permanently, or is considered to be like in permanent status, which is actually the presumption when somebody goes into a nursing home, all of their money goes to the nursing home except for $50 a month, which is considered their personal needs allowance. And so spousal impoverishment budgeting was designed to make sure that if there are two spouses and one is in a nursing home, that the one who's in the community is not completely impoverished by the fact that their spouse is in a nursing home. And so there's special budgeting for the spouse. This has now been extended to anybody who is in the community with managed long-term care, and also people who are in the NHTD, nursing home transition and diversion, or the traumatic brain injury waivers. And so the way that it works is that basically the spouse, the spouse getting the long-term care spouse basically gets to keep, and it's like, it's in quotes because at this point they're still living together. So it's not like it's just going to them in the nursing home. They get to keep $384 a month, and any amount of their income over that. So let's say the spouse is getting, the spouse getting long-term care gets, I'm going to make math really easy for myself, gets $884 in SSD every month. So they're keeping $384, and then $500 gets kind of given to their community spouse. And so the community spouse, between their money that's coming directly to them, whether that's earned income or whether that's their own Social Security, plus what they're kind of getting from their spouse, can go up to $3,022.50 a month. So it really is so altogether the household, can have almost $3,400 a month, and it's really advantageous in terms of in terms of allowing people to have a little bit more money and keep their Medicaid. A big thing, another thing here, which this is the thing that Lillian has a fair hearing about tomorrow. We're like, it couldn't be clearer. Why is the conference unit not fixing this? Is that if the MLTC spouse, or I'm using it generally because it also encompasses the waivers, it's more advantageous to just look at that person with their own income. You can actually treat that person as a household of one and just look at their own income. And so that's another thing to remember, and it's an exception to what we were talking about before in terms of the budgeting of an SSI related and non-SSI related spouse, and also two people who are SSI related, because you could have an SSI related spouse who is not MLTC. The other thing about spousal impoverishment that's different from spousal refusal, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, is that the other spouse can have Medicaid. They need to actually be eligible. So if they're, if we're talking about $3,000 a month of income, they may not be eligible, but they could, that spouse could have Medicaid as well, which is not the case with spousal refusal. So really important, if one person has MLTC or one of these other long-term care services, to remember to take advantage of spousal impoverishment budgeting. And it's amazing how much it's, the districts will not realize this, and you'll have to do it for them.
So can I clarify
Yeah.
for my own learning purposes? So you have husband and wife, one is getting long-term care, MLTC. That spouse can decide to be a person of one if it's more advantageous, and the other spouse living at home, her income doesn't count towards the MLTC?
Right, it won't count towards the MLTC spouse.
Okay.
So it's like, so for example, so I think we have this case where that spouse has zero income. Is it the MLTC spouse has zero?
MLTC spouse, I think, has, she's got, I want to say it's like $746 in Social Security, and husband is, he's working and he's got actually insurance through his private job, and so he's bringing in, like, I want to say it's between $2,000 and $3,000 a month. She's got stage 4 cancer, so she's on MLTC. They have 2 kids, and there was a lot of back and forth with HRA about allocation and deeming, and then Rebecca actually found this one line in the GIS that said if it's more advantageous for her, we can just count the Social Security, and since it's less than the 825 household of one, basically she's got no spend down, and it went from something like a $700 spend down to nothing. So,
and the other spouse can keep the income.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Sorry.
He can keep his income, and you're just looking at her.
Okay.
So,
Greg, yeah.
in cases where you use both income, they could effectively have a little over 4,000, right? 322.50 plus 384.
Yeah.
And get
Yeah.
Medicaid. So can you spend down to those levels?
Can you spend down to those levels?
No.
No.
So if you're gonna have a spend, if neither of these work, it's gonna be a spend down on the more advantageous method of counting both or counting one.
Hold on, so, no, I think you can spend down. Yeah, you can spend down over it, because it's like when somebody is in a nursing home. It's basically the NAMI. It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing as if somebody is in a nursing home, and any money over the spouse, what goes to the spouse and what goes to the nursing, and any money beyond what the spouse gets to keep and the institutionalized person gets to keep just goes to the nursing home. So it's really the same. It's really the same thing. So it's essentially it's basically like a nursing home NAMI, right?
Will you confirm that for us, Rebecca?
Yes, I will confirm that.
So you can spend down to the the 3,000 from the 3,000. I mean.
For purposes of the person with MLTC. The other person in this situation is not going to have Medicaid unless you're talking about a household that, like, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the community, the, like, quote, community spouse, because they may both be in the community, but if you're looking at it from the perspective of the community spouse, if they're, if they have $3,000 of income, they're not Medicaid eligible. They're not the one who is eligible for the spousal impoverishment budgeting. They're just benefiting that they don't owe all of this money in a spend down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So for the second bullet, so in relation to the second bullet, you're saying this. Right. Okay.
And so it may be, but there are situations where it's a household of, it is like a lower income household, and both people are eligible for Medicaid, and it may be that because of spousal impoverishment budgeting, like the spouse with long-term care, benefits from spousal impoverishment, but then the other person has a spend down in order for them to have Medicaid. So we can also, like, I'd be happy to sort of like give some examples if that would be helpful of sort of like how this plays out. And I'm really curious as to how this hearing is going to go, because it seems like clear as day to us that like she can be budgeted on her own, and for some reason HR seems to have agreed, but is still not doing it. So because that really does seem like a good option for a lot of people. Okay. Okay, so what do you do if none of these, if you're not eligible for spousal impoverishment and you are in fact over the limit, you have excess income and resources. What are some of your options? And so we will go through some of these options. So the transfer of assets. This comes up in situations of somebody having excess resources. And the really big thing to remember here is it's just really significant from the perspective of nursing home care. And so anytime you need nursing home care outside of a 29 days of rehab, there is a 5-year look back, and any assets that you have transferred you're considered to basically still have them. And so you're going to be penalized as if you still, in terms of Medicaid not paying for nursing home care, as if you still have those, assets. And so it's important to know this is not just when you are considered to be permanently placed and in chronic care budgeting. It's anybody who's in a nursing home other than, what's considered rehab for 29 days. And so, but then again, if a client and their family are willing to take the risk, they can transfer assets in order to qualify for community Medicaid, and they're just going to have a problem if within 5 years they actually do need nursing home care, and you need to document your resources for the last 5 years when you go into a nursing home. Otherwise, you basically don't get, Medicaid won't pay for a nursing home for the amount of time. That's the amount that you transferred divided by the monthly regional nursing home cost, which at this point is, I think, like 12 grand or something. So let's say you gave $120,000 to your son, and now you need to go into a nursing home. They're going to say, okay, you don't get payment for that nursing home by Medicaid for 10 months. So that's the risk with transfer of assets. And as you can see, there are some exceptions there. But for some people, they're willing to take that risk, and for community Medicaid, it really does, make sense for them. Okay.
I can do it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, whatever. All right. So for spousal refusal, Rebecca touched on this a little bit when we were talking about spousal impoverishment, but the two shouldn't be confused. So if a Medicaid applicant lives with a legally responsible relative, or LRR, whose income or resources are too high, the LRR can submit a signed statement that she or he can't contribute towards the Medicaid applicant's medical expenses and support of the applicant. So the LRR's income and resources won't be counted, and the applicant for Medicaid will be counted as a household of one. The thing to remember is that the refusing spouse or the refusing legally responsible relative cannot have Medicaid, unlike in spousal impoverishment. And the other important thing is that the LRR is still liable for support. So the local district in New York, HRA, can actually sue the LRR. It's the practice to use the income and resource levels that would be applicable to the institutionalized spouse when they're looking to potentially sue. And then
the refusing, I'm sorry, I have a question. So the refusing spouse cannot have Medicaid during the period of spousal refusal, or for the rest of their lives?
I think during the period of spousal refusal. Oh, yeah. Sorry, okay. I should have clarified.
No, you're good.
That's a good point. Yeah, the refusing spouse can't have Medicaid during the period of spousal refusal. I guess, should we see if there are other questions from the?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I'm going to leave that to you.
No questions.
Cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about spend downs, and you can spend down income or resources. So anyone who is taking advantage of non-MAGI budgeting, you can actually spend down to the applicable income limit. And we were talking about this a little bit even before this presentation started in today's meeting. This is available not just in cases of income coming in, but in case you've got excess resources. So in order to meet the spend down, like we were talking about with MLTC earlier, you can, well, we'll get to that later actually, sorry. So to meet the spend down, you can actually pay or incur medical expenses equal to or greater than your excess income. You can pay the amount of the excess income directly to your local district, presuming they actually process it and put up the Medicaid, or you can use a combination of both of these. So when you're spending down, it'll provide outpatient coverage for those who meet their spend down on a monthly basis. And I think, like Diane mentioned earlier, inpatient, and it'll give you inpatient and outpatient coverage if you meet 6 months of your spend down. So you won't get the inpatient coverage if you're doing just a monthly spend down. So you just need to have bills, you need to incur bills, you don't necessarily need to have paid them. You can actually use bills for your legally responsible relative if they're not using spousal refusal. And you can use them for family members like your child if you, as the Medicaid beneficiary, if you are their legally responsible relative. So bills can include health insurance deductibles, co-payments, medically necessary expenses that aren't covered by Medicaid, so that can be chiropractors, MDs or doctors who don't accept Medicaid, and medical expenses that are covered by Medicaid, costs paid by public programs like ADAP. And then for services that require prior approval, it's limited to what is approved as medically necessary. And there are special rules that govern the use of old versus new bills and paid versus unpaid bills, and whether you're using those bills as part of a new Medicaid application or to maintain your benefits. And I think that that would probably be a whole another 20 minutes or so on this presentation, so we can go into that maybe later or another time. So spend down and manage long-term care. Managed long-term care enrollees automatically meet their spend down by virtue of being enrolled in the program. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're paying their spend down. They're two different things, but you're meeting your spend down. So what happens is these enrollees incur liability in whatever the amount of the spend down is, and they incur that liability to the plan. So it's, you know, they can meet their spend down through other bills as well. It's just kind of a pain to coordinate. And like Rebecca was mentioning before this presentation started, the MLTC plans can initiate involuntary disenrollment if the enrollee doesn't pay his or her spend down, but they cannot stop services without notice or refuse to enroll a potential enrollee because he or she has a spend down. So again, I think just the important thing to remember is that there's a difference between meeting your spend down, you know, which means you're eligible for Medicaid, and then being actually responsible for the payment to the plan.
I'm just going to jump in on one thing about enrollment in terms of the spend down at MLTC. There are, like, as Lillian said, you can't, like, a plan can't say I'm not enrolling you, you have a spend down. Excuse me. But it can be a pain to get in to, there are logistical issues that exist when somebody is first enrolled in Medicaid and they have a spend down and they're not in the plan yet. And there's this coding thing that has to happen sort of with the plan and, excuse me, the plan and the local district, and sometimes it gets screwed up, and then you hear all kinds of things like, we can't enroll you unless you pay a month of spend down, which is just not true. And if that's happening, then, you know, let us know. It's one of those situations where everyone's pointing fingers at each other, but yes, you can get into MLTC even if you have not paid your spend down. There's like a code that needs to be switched.
And can I just add, because we discussed a little bit more about this issue in our downstate, with our downstate advocates. So the case example is you have a client and there seems to be a spend down issue and the client has MLTC. So one, you have to check to see whether the client paid the MLTC plan for the spend down, but in reality, the main takeaway is that services should continue. The MLTC plan and not the local district is in charge of initiating the disenrollment for the non-payment of the spend down. I don't remember when or where, but I've heard that some MLTC plans may be willing to just kind of forget about getting the spend down depending on the amount, because it's better for them to get paid in general than disenroll clients and continue to provide those services. But again, the plan can initiate disenrollment with proper notice if you do not pay the spend down. Big takeaway, MLTC, the plan is collecting the spend down, not the local district. So I think we tend to go directly with the local district, but in this situation, if they have MLTC in place, it will be the plan.
Oh, and that's me anyway. Okay. All right. So supplemental needs trust. This is something we also touched on briefly during the downstate case review portion. So a supplemental needs trust allows somebody to maintain eligibility for government benefits. It's a whole other other topic is there are people who actually can use trust to maintain eligibility for SSI when they have excess income or resources, but we're really just talking about it for Medicaid. And there are different kinds of trusts. We're really just talking about pooled income trust, which is mostly what comes up for for our population. Generally, if somebody has a spend down, their income is more than the Medicaid limit, they can put that excess income into a trust, and that income just gets disregarded on a monthly basis. Sometimes people, trusts also come up if like a young disabled person sometimes will get like a big settlement in a lawsuit or something, and they want to maintain their Medicaid eligibility. It might make sense for them to do like an individual trust that might be better designed, for their particular needs. Generally those are things that we refer people to private attorneys to sort of set up a trust that works best for them. It's something that elder lawyers tend to specialize in. But generally we're talking about a pooled income trust for people with a spend down. Trusts, supplemental needs trusts have to be irrevocable. You can't get rid of it. You can't get money out of it. In terms of like, you can't get cash out of it. Any money that goes in has to be paid out by the trust paying certain expenses. And so it's not that you need to continue to use the trust forever. You could simply stop using it. It's just that any money that you can't say like, okay, I don't want to have a trust anymore, so I'm just going to pull my cash out. You can't do that. It's only for individuals who are disabled. This comes up sometimes in terms of somebody who might be 70 years old and they weren't getting SSD. They were never certified disabled before they were 65, and now they have a spend down because they're only eligible for SSI related budgeting, and they're like, well, of course I'm disabled, but but they've never been certified disabled, so they need to actually be certified disabled by the state before they're able to use an SNT. These trusts get paid back to the state upon someone's death, and so and in the case of a pool trust, the nonprofit that runs the trust actually gets gets the money back. So again, if there's, if somebody has like a substantial amount of money and they're concerned about wanting to, leave money to heirs, then, that's the type of thing that they really should talk to a private elder lawyer about doing Medicaid planning, because a pooled trust may not be the right thing for them, or an SNT. And I'll just say, I said this to the downstate group before, but I'll just, like, in terms of the SNT, SNTs are a really good option for some people, but I think that people are often told, when they have a spend down, oh, just go get an SNT, and sometimes they're told that by plans. And I think we should always remember that a plan has an incentive for their members to have an SNT, because it means that they won't have a spend down anymore, and they're going to make more money off the person. And so when somebody comes to us and says, I want an SNT, I think there's really a whole series of questions that people should be asked. And the first question is really, do they need Medicaid? Because if they don't have long-term care needs, if they have long-term care needs, then if they need long-term home care, then of course they need Medicaid. And Medicare is not going to be sufficient. But in particular, if they're a person who's eligible for an MSP and they don't need to be paying their Part B premium, or maybe they're even eligible for QIMBY and they don't need to be, paying their Medicare copays either. It may be the Medicare is sufficient for them, or they may be a person who's a good candidate for a Medigap to help them with their Medicare, to help them with their Medicare cost sharing. Or they may be, we're going to talk about the Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities. Maybe they are disabled and working and under 65, and that's an option for them. Or maybe they're a person who, might need Medicaid services in certain months and not others, and maybe they're a person for whom, just sort of paying into their spend down in certain months would work. So, I think that that trusts, are certainly a good option for some people, but they have monthly costs, they have annual costs, and it's a lot, and it's logistics. People really need to get it set up. They need to get their bills paid by the trust, and we always want to make sure that people are going into it with like their eyes open in terms of what the costs are and what the time and logistics that are required, before people rush into it just because their plan said you should get an SNT. So that said, the Medicaid. Oh, should I check for questions? Yeah, a moment. Okay.
Can I just check if someone raised their virtual hand?
Oh, sure.
Sorry, I forgot that part. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to check to see if anyone raised their hand with a question. Okay, we're good.
Alrighty. So, MBI-WPD is a really great option for a lot of people who are under 65 and they're working and their income is over the Medicaid limit. So you need to be engaged in paid work. It can be part-time. It can be really part-time. This is something that we're getting a little bit worried about, because we've been hearing about some people who are being told that they're like not actually working or not sufficiently working if they're doing things like walking their neighbor's dog once a week, or babysitting for their grandkids every once in a while. And so we have heard of some hearings that have happened where people have been told that they're not legitimately engaged in work. But until different guidance comes out, I think we should sort of keep operating that if you're doing any work, you can be eligible. It's a higher income limit, not only in kind of the basic income limits, which you can see that's the household of one and household of two, but because of the earned income disregard, and anybody who's eligible for MBI-WPD is by definition disabled, they're eligible for subtracting 65 and then dividing the rest of their of their earned income by 2. And so for somebody who is working full-time, they actually have a lot of flexibility to be really earning some money and still be eligible for Medicaid. And I mean, the reason for this in that circumstance is that, there are people who, who are working, and they may even be eligible for insurance through their job, but without the type of benefits that Medicaid provides, including home care and other things that might be, crucial for somebody with a disability. They really can't not have Medicaid. This is part of non-MAGI. Yeah. And so, and there is a higher resource limit. So there's, I think, there's kind of two kinds of people we see with MBI WPD. It's people who are, might be working full time and, might be, making, $50,000, $60,000 a year. But then also, there are people who are getting SSD, but they're able to do a little bit of work on the side, and this can be a really good option for them, and much easier than a trust. And then this is actually the last slide. If you can't see the heading, is just Medicare savings programs, and this is just a brief summary of MSPs. As I said a few minutes ago, sometimes for people, getting an MSP and getting that, extra $100 and something a month, really is a good option for them rather than an SNT if they don't have long-term care rules. And there's no asset limit. Where we said it can increase net available income, that's an important thing to remember just in terms of the spend down, because there might be somebody who, has a, who has a small spend down, or who doesn't have a spend down without an MSP, and then because they're going to be getting more money every month if they do have an MSP, suddenly they have a spend down. And so depending on their particular situation, it might make more, like, it's really a case-by-case situation. It might be beneficial for that person to just have the MSP and either pay a small spend down or just not have Medicaid. It may work for them to not have the MSP and just lower their available income, so they're not dealing with a spend down. It may, there's different things. You can also, with a trust, become eligible for an MSP if you were not otherwise. So that's the end of our. Oh, we timed that pretty well. It's 11:57.
So we still have like 4 minutes or less, and I'm going to use them. Okay. Let me just check to make sure there are no questions. You can raise at this point your virtual hand if you have any questions. And then just to put this training in context, when a consumer comes to you and says, I don't have insurance or I'm underinsured, your first analysis is going to be, are you MAGI in general? Can we send you to the marketplace? And if you're not, do we have to do the non-MAGI route? The big flags are they over 65? At that point, you're trying to trigger, are you eligible for Medicare? If not, you're going back to the non-MAGI to determine whether they may be eligible for Medicaid. If they are blind or disabled, again, those are triggers, those are going to be non-MAGI. And then Rebecca said something that really hit home is, when you're exploring the non-MAGI route, assuming that they do have some type of insurance, you really want to analyze whether they in fact need Medicaid. Because if they're over 65, for example, you might just explore the Medicare savings programs to figure out if they're okay, they don't need long-term care services. Once you enter the non-MAGI world, you have to remember that there are specifics depending if you're dealing with the age over 65 or someone who's disabled. If someone is disabled, you may be looking into, aside from spend down, in the Medicaid buy-in program for people who are working, right? So again, big context step back. Is it the MAGI role? That should be pretty straightforward. If it's the non-MAGI role, remember they may be different roles if you're dealing with someone who is over 65 versus someone who's disabled. And when we say disabled, your big question, especially if they're looking into a trust, is are you certified disabled? You do not want to provide like an hour-long explanation of how the trust work and then realize, well, you're not even certified disabled, right? So always step back and go through your chain in whatever makes sense in your head, and really like think about the advice you're giving, because we've all done it. We spend like an hour or 2 hours and then we realize we forgot to ask like that one critical question, or the fact you really need like long-term care services. We assume that if someone comes and says, yeah, I need Medicaid because I need long-term care services, it's like, well, no, not really. Like, tell me what you really need. So
the other take-home is just to remember when you're thinking about non-MAGI Medicaid eligibility, if there's earned income involved, remember there are special rules and link back to these resources about how that earned income is counted. And those special rules for earned income go across these non-MAGI programs that Rebecca discussed, the MSP, the MBIWPD, et cetera.
Yep. And if you get stuck, you can always reach out and get technical support to do the proper budgeting. And when we say to do the proper budgeting, usually is the client applies and they get denied, and then you're trying to figure out what went wrong, right? So I think, wait, there's a question. Hold on. Karen?
Yep, this is Karen. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes. Yep. Go ahead.
Yes, you can hear me? Okay. I have a question, and it has to do with a married couple, and the husband is on SSD, has Medicare, has fee-for-service Medicaid, and is subject to the resource test. His wife has marketplace Medicaid, so she is not subject to the resource test. So you get the foundation of the question there?
Yep.
Okay. So the wife is expecting a large inheritance, and that is going to put resources into this married couple. The question is, the wife doesn't have a resource test, but the husband does. But he has, so will they be viewed under this circumstance? Will he still be viewed as having the resource level of an individual, or will they be looking at a resource level of a couple? For his
So she's he's SSI related and she's not SSI related? Exactly. She's under 65?
Yeah, she's MAGI.
Right. I mean, they're considered when you're looking at it from his perspective, they're considered a household of two for resources, regardless of how you're looking at them for how you're looking at them for income. How is it a really big inheritance?
Potentially.
I mean,
3 figures.
You mean six? I assume you mean.
No, I mean like 60 or 70,000. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So I mean, there's, there's probably, depending on like sort of their whole circumstance, there are, different things they could think about. How close to, like some of the things I would want to know are like, is she going to have a resource test soon? Like, how old is she? Is she going to have a resource test soon too? Would they it might be a situation where they should talk to somebody about doing a trust. If she has other options for, coverage, she, could theoretically think about doing a spousal refusal, but it might be more likely that with like a chunk of money, they would be more likely to go after her. Yeah. Oh, right. Especially upstate. So, I mean, I'd be happy to talk. What?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'd be happy to talk through. Sort of the details more, but they should because about sort of like what all of their options are, but they are going to be looked at. They are going to be looked at as one as one household. I don't know if they have like a, if there's somebody, like another family member who they could give it, sometimes people do that. They like give it to another family member, or they think about trust or things like that.
Why does the guy on SSD need Medicaid? And if he's on SSD, is he getting Medicare soon?
I think he has Medicare already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's probably 65 or close to it.
So why does he need Medicaid? I mean, maybe it's a good idea for him not to have, maybe it's a good idea to explore some Medicare supplement or MSP where there's no resource test.
Does he have long-term care needs or no?
I have to admit, I haven't looked at this, their case for which means I've been looking at a lot of other cases, so I don't remember. Helpful. I can go back and look at all of this.
Yeah, no, if you want to discuss it further, I'm happy to. Like, I think, Diane's point is good in terms of, like, it may be that if he doesn't have long-term care needs, I mean, if you're talking about paying for long-term care, then, I mean, that's $60,000 is going to be gone in a minute. But if you're talking about, but if like a Medicare supplement could be a good option for them, they could, with that much money coming in, they could afford that for him. And that might be a better option than having to deal with getting rid of the, resource in some way.
Okay. And when you say call you, I'm sorry, I don't know who I'm talking to.
Oh, it's Rebecca. I'm sorry. Or you can just send it to, you can email us our intake email address for you guys is hlu@legal-aid.org.
I will resend the instructions on how to get technical assistance from our specialists. And yep. So that was a great example of how like it can get really complicated once you start talking about a case. I am not gonna, we went over 5 minutes. Sorry. Thank you so much for joining. I will follow up via our weekly emails, especially for upstate groups. There was a question about the slides. I did send them out. I'll resend them. Thank you so much and have a great day. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.